suddenly all the radio thoughts left my brain because I got diagnosed with a chronic disease.
Hello, everyone, my friends. This is Dr. Jim Hoven for the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast, and today is another day to hear an incredible story, someone making a difference, someone who's got an incredible story to share, and it has been my pleasure just visiting with this gentleman for a few minutes before the show. I am pumped up because of the history, the path, the magical life that this guy's led. You're going to be blown away. So I want you to sit back and relax, and we might take a little bit of a trip down memory lane through some of the radio industry that he's been in his massive career. And then we're going to talk some heavier stuff too, a little bit about how his life changed with a chronic illness. And then we're also going to go into what he's writing about, the things going through his mind, which affect all of us, especially with the impact of what we'll just call free speech. So there's going to be some great things on this show. I hope you enjoy it, and then celebrate that by sharing it with someone else. So without further ado, I want to introduce my guest, Mr. Kim Curry. Kim, welcome to the show.
Dr. Jim, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, absolutely. I've been so excited for this, looking through all the information about you, and we were talking before, and you have been part of a massive change in radio. We talked a little bit about how it's different now than it was back in the day, but as we get started just hearing your story, would you tell us just a little bit of background about you, where you came from, and how you became to be so interested in radio?
Okay, well, it's pretty simple. I'm from Canyon City, Colorado.
Yay, we love Canyon City.
There's only one radio station in Canyon City. My dad used to work there. So there was a time when on KRLN, the radio station there, every Sunday morning, they would play back the previous week's church services on Sunday mornings. And my dad came home one day from work and he said, listen, Martin, the general manager, wants to know if you want to come babysit this weekend. Well, when I was in high school, I was 17 years old at the time. I used to babysit my parents' friends' kids to make money, just an easy way. So when he said babysit, I thought...
You thought it was kids?
No problem. I got that. Well, when I got to the radio station and went to the GM's office, I was expecting to see kids. He said, no, I want you to babysit the radio station. And I was questioning, what do you mean by that? He said, well, on Sunday mornings, we play back all the church services from the previous week, and nobody wants that job. We need someone to push the buttons and once an hour, give the station identification. And that's all you got to do. Run the tapes and say the ID. So I was 17. I thought, well, why not? This will give me a chance to be on the radio. Of course, KRLN was not necessarily the radio station my friends were listening to. They were listening
especially on Sunday morning.
On Sunday morning. They were listening to all the Pueblo radio stations at the time. So, the first time you turn the mic on and you say and I remember exactly what I said. The ID was, this is KRLN, Canyon City, Colorado, the station with the news reputation. But to hear that in my headphones for the first time, it was like, oh my Lord, this is something I really enjoy. And, I've been listening to, top 40 music from the 60s and 70s. I've been listening to KKAM and KDZA in Pueblo, all these top 40 stations. And I got to be one of those guys just by being on this radio station. Although it was not a popular station. They believed in an audience of 54 plus. But,
so did the chicks dig it then?
Well, it was exciting for my friends to hear me on the radio, but none of them paid attention.
Oh, that's awesome.
But then I decided to go to college and study. I was a music major. I thought I was, in fact, I did. I went to go be a music major at Southern Colorado State College in Pueblo, which then became Colorado State University through the CSU system in Fort Collins.
Yes.
But SCSC was in 1976. That's what the school was. And so I went to school there, stopped going to my music classes because I'd heard my voice on the radio and I wanted to be a DJ. So I stopped going to music classes and spent 2.5 years there in the broadcasting classes in Pueblo.
Were your parents super happy about that, or did they want you to chase the music? Or okay. And tell me about the music. Did you play instruments, sing, both? I was a trumpet player. Actually was I was in the CU all-state band, so I was a pretty good trumpet player at the time, which is why I went there to major in music. I thought, my whole life, I really thought I was going to be a band director somewhere, but that one time on the radio got me. Changed. But now my father knew the business, and they're like going, no,
You need to stick with your music. No, the music. Well, I couldn't. I was already, the bug had already bitten me, and radio is what it was. So 2.5 years after doing part-time on a top 40 radio station down there, it was KKAM at the time, and then being program director of the college radio station, I thought I had enough background, enough skill to be able to start applying for jobs around the country. We send little air checks out when you're in the radio business. And all that is you saying, hey, it's KKAM, here's the very latest by Stevie Wonder. And that's all the air check is. So you send these around the country, and when a program director hears something he likes, he calls you and says, I want you to come work for me. So after 2.5 years in college, I got that phone call from Knoxville, Tennessee. A guy by the name of Stevie Clark, who was very famous at the time. He had been in KHJ Los Angeles, was at WCFL in Chicago, and now was running this little station in Knoxville. So I'm driving across the country, and I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm going out for my first full-time radio job. I'm going to go on at 10 o'clock at night. I need a really cool name because Kim Curry is not going to cut it. And back then, you had the Boogeyman, you had Wolfman, you had guys with really funky names. So I thought I'd call myself Night Smoke.
Night Smoke Curry.
Night Smoke Curry, yeah. So the day that I drive up to the radio station, I get out of the car and I climb up the stairs and I open up the door, and there's a lady at the receptionist desk and a guy behind her in a Hawaiian shirt and curly hair, and he was huge. And so I reached out to the young woman and I said, hello, I'm your new nighttime disc jockey, I'm Night Smoke. And the guy behind her said, well, if it isn't Kid Curry. And I turned around and I said, I hate that name. And the reason I hated it, because you've got to go all the way back to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the movie. There was a TV show called Alias Smith and Jones, which was a takeoff of that movie. And in 1972, 73, that TV show was on. And when I go to high school, hey, Kid Curry. So I hated people calling me Kid Curry. So this guy turns around and says, there he is. It's Kid. Well, hello, if it isn't Kid Curry. And I said, well, I hate that name. And he said, well, then I won't sign your check.
Oh, so that was the guy.
Kid Curry it is.
I love that name.
So that's where that name came from. But surprisingly enough, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because there is no other Kid Curry in the radio business. It hasn't been. Then there was one Kid Curry in a college station one time, but I was identifiable because in the 70s, disc jockeys had big, deep voices. I mean, you've got to, if you know the history of radio, young guys like me never made it on the radio. We just didn't, because I didn't have a big, what they call ballsy voice. Yeah. Well, my style and my voice connected to Kid, being a kid. So on the radio at 6 to 10 o'clock at night, my primary job was then to win the teenage audience, which is something that I just loved doing, because I was 22 years old. I was on the radio at 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock at night. All the kids were calling me, and it was a pretty famous radio career. So it worked out, and I was proud of the people I went to go work for and did very well for them. And then the two guys that I ended up working for in Miami were the guys that really identified my career. They hired me at all the places I needed to be hired.
And did you follow them? Like they would go from station to station, and they would bring you along?
That's really what caused them to pay attention to me, because I didn't. Everybody else followed these. Jerry Clifton and Bill Tanner, if you go all the way back to the 70s, you radio guys, I just said names, you went, ooh. These are two geniuses of the 1970s and 80s in radio programming. They had better radio stations than all the other stations in the country. When I was in college, I used to listen, because part of our education in college was to study the other radio stations around the country. And they would send these cassette tapes out, and we would listen to what they called American air checks. And you could hear Los Angeles radio, Sacramento radio, you could hear Rhode Island radio, New York, and there were these cassettes that came in from Miami. But every time we listened to all these other stations, the ones that mattered to us as we were sitting around the room in college was, those Miami stations aren't like everybody else. They sound like they're having fun. They were giving away $50,000 cash prizes, and not once, but like 8 times in a year. And that wasn't happening anywhere else in America. So when I got to Miami, okay, so let me just quickly go back. I was in Knoxville for 6 months, and the guy that hired me, Steve Clark, got fired. So then I had to start sending out those tapes again. I sent it to the right guy in Miami. He said, you need to come down to work here for me. And that was really the beginning of my radio career, was in Miami. And that was 1976. And I did it for 33 years and bounced around, worked for these guys. It was a program director. They were consultants, and they sent me to stations to program, but I didn't have any success, because I think I thought I knew too much. But then, because of the history of the radio business, you go to different markets. Back then, you bounced around. You don't do that now. But I went from Miami to San Antonio up to Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, and then back to Miami. Then I went to Pueblo, Colorado, because my father had both his legs amputated, and I felt like I needed to go home and help my dad. But I was only there for a year. Remember, my father was a radio guy, so he's going, "What are you doing, man? You're a pretty famous guy in the radio business. You better get back to Miami."
So he was happy at this point that you made the decision to radio.
Yeah.
Before, now go music.
Well,
now he's like, okay, radio's cool.
Well, because he would read about these Miami radio stations in the trade magazines.
Yeah.
And then suddenly his son was working there. So, and then when I became program director of the station in Miami, the Power 96, we really had unique success that was unmarked anywhere in the history of the station. It's still on now, but it's never done as well as it did when I was programming.
Can you describe what that means to be a program director?
Okay.
Everyone's familiar with the term, but I don't know that they understand it. I don't know that I understand it. So I'd love to know more what that is versus a DJ versus a general manager, that kind of thing.
The DJs you hear, they're the guys who say the things and play the songs. The program director is the one who says, this is what you're going to say, and this is what you're going to play, and this is how many of these songs you're going to play every hour. This is how many commercials you're going to play every hour. This is how many promotional announcements you're going to play every hour. So the program director is responsible for every minute of the broadcast day. If it comes out of the speaker, the DJ is only doing what the program director told him to do.
Got it.
But the program director is every minute of the day, 24/7, 365. And when we switch over to the MS conversation, I will let you know that came a time when my doctor said, I think you may have stressed yourself into this MS because of the constant pressure I put myself under. But we can get to that whenever you want. So, but that's the program director's job. And the GM, of course, he handles the sales department and kind of looks over programming just to make sure they're not spending too much money. So the GM is in charge, but the program director decides what comes out of the radio, and the DJs are doing what the program director says.
And do you guys, and I have a self-interest in this question, we do a fair amount of radio advertising through our law firm here.
Yes, sir.
Is it the program director that says, okay, we want you to put Ramos Law in at this, and this? Or is that the people that sold the ads to us that say, hey, we told them we were going to get 3 avails a day, so you guys do that? How does the advertising piece work there?
That is all put into computer systems. You buy however many commercials you want during the day, and the computer then just puts them wherever it wants them.
Oh, okay.
It used to be that guys like me, programmers, would put our favorite accounts up front or the best commercial up front because we wanted the radio station to sound like it was moving all the time.
Yes.
So if you're going ba, 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 and then you go into a dry voice commercial, you stop the flow of the radio station.
Oh,
so
wow.
It used to be, we used to control which commercials played and when they played, but they don't do that now. You go into a system, they punch the button, and everything just comes rolling up. I don't know if there's a 1, 2, or 3 anymore. I think it's just random. They put you at random.
Okay.
And unless somebody's just decided that they're going to do it, but I don't think that happens.
Well, I was interested and fascinated actually when we were talking before. You had shared with me about how you were at an English station, but yet you had a lot of bilingual folks, and that you had created this model / genre where music was going to have some Spanish lyrics in it alongside the top 40.
Right.
I've never heard that. Other than, again, we mentioned this, the Los Lonely Boys is one example I can think of where in the middle of their songs, they have a little bit of Spanish so that if you've heard the English version, you assume that you kind of know what the Spanish words are.
Right.
But other than that, even today, at least here in Denver, I don't see a lot of that. So I want you to explain that to me. That was fascinating.
Well, I went to Miami in 1976. That was my first year there, and Miami was very much, as I told you a minute ago, very much Miami Vice. It was very laid back. There was way too much fun happening. The Playboy Club was busy every night. It was really too much show business, and everything changed when the Mariel boat lift started. When Mariel happened, you started having this influx of Cubans coming into the populace. So now you've got a populace who's basically Jimmy Buffett. Now you're getting Ricky Ricardo to live with Jimmy Buffett. And I always believed that, and I actually had presented this format to radio stations in the 1980s, that, because we're Miami, because of where we are, because I am a white guy speaking as much Spanish as I can. I'm bilingual. I'm trying to live in this market here. We've got Spanish speakers, we have English speakers, we have bilingual speakers, we have people doing Spanglish. Let's put English songs, pop songs, on the radio with the top Spanish songs. And if we have to, let's make sure we design the Spanish songs with some English in it so those who are listening can kind of feel like, oh, I'm part of this. Well, I like I said, I put that format to some people in the 1980s, and they said no. And then years go by, and I get the opportunity. The guy who was programming Power 96 when I was just a DJ, he gets dismissed, and they put me in as the interim program director. So for 6 months, all the genius program directors from all around the country were coming in going, hey, I want to program this station.
Because it's a big deal.
It's
station.
Miami. Power 96 is
Yeah.
a huge operation.
Right.
So I would be sitting there at the desk, and the GM would say, well, here's our interim program director, Kid Curry. And I'd be thinking, you don't belong here. You don't know anything about Miami.
Yeah.
You don't know. You've been in St. Louis. You don't know what this market is about. And I kept hearing that over and over again for 6 months. But while the bosses were bringing in these new program directors, I was switching the radio station over to this Spanglish stuff before anybody even paid attention. We had mix shows back then. I mean, mixers would come on and mix for 15 minutes an hour. They'd come back a couple hours later, mix for 15 minutes. Well, I kept telling the mixers, do me a favor, go find me the top Spanish dance songs and intersperse those in your mix and see what happens. Well, 6 months go by. They're looking at me as the interim. I've changed kind of the format of the radio station, and then the ratings start going up. And they're going, what are you doing? Well, you guys weren't paying attention, but I believe we should do this Spanglish type format so that anybody who lives in Miami, who's probably either Spanish or Spanglish, because it's a heavy, you have, in order to survive, you can't get a cab unless you're speaking Spanish in Miami. So I really believed you could do this bilingual format and win. Well, after I did that, first 6 months, they finally paid attention. A year later, it was the #1 radio station in Miami. And so it was the right thing to do. It took me 10 years to convince anybody to do it, but when I did it, it worked. And after I left, they stopped doing it, and the ratings have dramatically dropped off.
Wow.
But you have to have this, you have to have it in your head. What I always figured that if I could tell if a song belonged on the radio. When the record companies would come with their record guys, they'd throw all these songs in front of me. You got to hear this, you got to hear this. I could hear it one time and think, doesn't belong here. That belongs here. That doesn't belong here. And we passed up on very famous songs. But I get up again, get me down. I never played that song.
Yeah.
That's Chumbawamba, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I just
Gabe
came
probably knows that. Gabe's a musician.
I don't know. I didn't play it.
Yeah.
So I didn't play a whole lot of songs that the nation was playing because they didn't fit in Miami. Chumbawamba, when you've got, Celia Cruz, who is the queen of Miami, I'm not playing Chumbawamba. I'd rather play Celia Cruz. So these are the little things I did, and it became very famous, and it was the right thing for me because as this is going on, the last 9 years of my career, and I've made these changes at Power 96, what was happening to me throughout my life began to happen all the time. I didn't know what it was, doctor. I thought I'd been bit by fire ants. I thought I'd been stung by killer bees. A couple of times in my life, my hand would curl up, or I'd lose vision in my right eye, or my right shoulder would just give out. Sometimes I couldn't feel the pads on my feet. I didn't think my feet were making contact with the ground.
And how old were you at this time when that first started happening?
Well, the first time was in 5th grade.
Oh.
And then years would go by, and then something would happen. I was in San Antonio, working in San Antonio at the time, and all of a sudden, this happened. And then I couldn't see, and then it went away. In fact, at one time in Washington, D.C., when I was working in D.C., I had an exacerbation on the grounds of the White House. Here we go. Okay, now my Kid Curry show, because I was winning all the teens at night, the last 5 minutes of my show, I'd let the kids call in and make these comments about, do you want to rip on your teacher? You want to say something about your school? And I just put these phone calls on, and they'd say something, and I'd fire back a comment to them. But at the end of this thing, I'd say, come get me, mother. I'm through. And that would be the end of my show. Well, that segment in Washington, D.C., that I'd always directed towards teenagers in D.C. became political. I would get political comments. go from phone to phone and think, man, these guys it's all politics.
Yeah.
But there would be kids every now and then, so I would cut all the old politics out and just run the kids. Then there was this guy who kept calling every night. He'd say, my name is Frank DeFramer. And we're talking 1983, 82. President Reagan was just in my office listening to your show. He thinks you're funny. And I go, oh, sure, thanks. I go to the next call because I didn't believe him.
Yeah.
He called back the next night. Well, Mr. Reagan was just here. He heard that and he says, okay, sure, yeah, ha, ha, ha. I go to the next call. I just thought it was a bit.
Yeah.
Well, he kept calling so many times because this was recorded, I could stop and go, hey, wait a minute, who are you? Well, I stopped. I said, listen. He called himself Frank DeFramer. Listen, who are you, Frank DeFramer? He says, well, my name is Frank, and someone has to take care of the portraits in the White House. I'm the guy who does that. They call me Frank DeFramer. And when I tell you that the president was in my office listening to your show, he really was. He was in there listening every time. So Frank and I have this phone relationship. Now he's calling, saying other things. He's a funny guy on my show. I kind of add him as a character. Then I leave Washington, D.C., go up to Baltimore to work in Baltimore. So I'm on the radio in Baltimore, and then my girlfriend that I'm with, her grandma comes to visit from Texas. And she says, well, if you know somebody at the White House, you've got to get me a tour. So I call the White House, and I'm like, I need to speak to Frank DeFramer. And they're like, oh, Frank, hang on. I'm like, whoa, really? Okay. So Frank gets on the phone. I'm Frank, it's Kid Curry. Kid, where'd you go? I'm up in Baltimore. Bada, listen, I got a girlfriend's grandma in town. She wants to come visit the White House. Can you set me up with a tour? When you get here, kid, when you come in, just find an entrance. I'll let everybody know you're coming. Just tell them who you are, and they'll get you to me, and we'll give you a tour. Thanks, Frank. So this is just after Reagan's assassination attempt, but they hadn't changed security around the White House yet. So I'm driving around the White House, and I see a road that looks like it goes right next door to the White House. That must be the road I'm supposed to take.
Absolutely.
So I start driving down this road, and all of a sudden, Secret Service starts coming out of everywhere, and they're pulling guns. And I start getting this,
yeah,
and the adrenaline starts to run. Arm curls up. I lose instant vision in my right eye. And when I went to go get out of the car, I fell out of the car. I'm Kid Curry. Like, Kid, Frank said you were coming. Are you okay? Can we get your wheelchair? So no, Grandma's in the back. Get her the wheelchair. And eventually, these symptoms went away. But what that is MS is a stress-related disease. And as you can see, I'm hyperventilating now, even telling the story.
Yeah.
So that went away, but it was another exacerbation that had happened to me throughout my life that I didn't know what was going on. And then in 2004, I came home to visit my mother with my wife and my kids here in Canyon City. And my mom kept bugging my wife, says, something wrong with him. Look at his face. It's deformed. It doesn't look right. His eye doesn't look right. And so my wife was convinced that she should take me to the doctor. And then we went back to Miami, and it took about a month and a half for them to diagnose me, but then I got diagnosed with MS. But what happened to me was, first of all, my radio career, if you ever read my memoir, Come Get Me Mother, I'm Through, you'll see that I was fairly obsessed. It never shut off. I mean, when you're the program director, you're up at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning making sure everybody's saying the right things. And then you're doing the same thing at 6 in the morning, 10 in the morning, back to 6 at night.
So there's not shifting the program director. No. It's not like, hey, you're the AM guy, you're the PM guy, you're the 24
you're the
guy.
All the time. So when I got diagnosed, suddenly all the radio thoughts left my brain because I got diagnosed with a chronic disease. I'd never even realized what MS was. In fact, I was at a corporate meeting over in Naples when my doctor called to tell me that I had MS, and I picked up my stuff, went into the office, talked to the doctor. She said, you've got MS. I went back into the meeting. I said, well, guys, I've just been diagnosed with MS. I'm going home. And on the way back to Miami, I was in Naples, so there's a 3-hour drive back to Miami. I'm on the phone the whole time with my wife going, what is this stuff? What is MS? What does that mean? And so she's reading to me over the phone that it's pretty serious. People die from this. So it completely took my mind off the radio business. I went through the weekend, and on Monday morning when I went into the office, I went and I told them I'm done. The reason I'm done is because I haven't thought about you guys for 3 days. And this station cannot survive if I'm not going to think about it for over 3 days. So I've got to leave. You need to put somebody in here who can concern themselves with the station because it was bigger than me. I didn't want anything to happen to it. It was famous in the first place. It was handed to me by the guys who were my mentors in radio, and I did really well with it, and I didn't want to hurt it. So I wanted to get the heck out so somebody else could come in and keep it going.
Instantly, that was your decision. Was there any thinking about it? Did you have to go like, man, where am I going to replace the income? And what about this? Or was it like, my health is number one?
I'm done. My wife and I spent the whole weekend. I was panicked for my wife. I was panicked for my family. And I went in and said, I'm done. And then I started thinking about things like, oh no, what about income? But when I said I'm done, the company said, no, we're going to find some place for you to go. We'll find, you can be an operations manager. And I'm like, I appreciate it, but no. It took a week for me to say no, because they kept coming back with something else. I said, no, I got to go. I want to go. But during that week, when I was worried about my income, as a program director, I didn't think much about the office. And our general manager's secretary would come in all the time. The office manager would come in and have me just sign papers. Well, I had signed a long-term health plan. I didn't even know it. So as I'm sitting there during this week of going, now what am I going to do? I'm going to have to move. I got to sell my house. The office manager walked in and said, you signed a long-term health plan. You don't have to worry about your income, because at the time I was making $250,000 a year. You can't do that today. As a program director, nobody in programming makes $250,000 a year because of the corporation takeover. But so suddenly, that was all gone. So now I could really just concentrate on taking care of me. So my wife and I decided that the best place for us to go was Canyon City, because the economy was low. My mom is there. I have high school friends still around if I need help. And we'll just learn how to have MS in Canyon City. So I packed up everything off my Miami Lakes. I was on Don Shula's golf course at the 7th hole. I used to play all the time, and sold the house and moved out to Canyon City and bought a new house out there, bought some property, and then spent the next 10 years learning how to have multiple sclerosis.
And how was that? My uncle's got MS, and you are just so highly functioning with respect to your speech and your movement and your color and everything, because I've seen this from a very intimate perspective, with my uncle. Did you, when you said living with it, did you find certain treatments that helped, certain dietary regimens? What did you do to navigate that?
When I first got diagnosed, for 8 years, I was in decline. I went from walking to a cane to crutches to a wheelchair in about 2.5 years. For the next 6 years, the doctors were Dr. Bowling was having to give me solumeterol, steroid treatments to calm my brain down. They were doing everything they could because I have lesions in my neck, lesions on my brain. It was hitting me for 8 years, and I was on a drug called Rebif. Well, the doctor finally decided that this Rebif ain't working. You're going to die if we don't get you off of this. So let's go to a new one. When I first got diagnosed, there were like 4 or 5. Now, 8 years later, there's 8 to 10 new MS drugs. He put me on a new one, and he said, at the same time, he says, I want you on this drug, and I want you to take large doses of vitamin D. Well, I'm a radio DJ who used to put his mom on the show. And I would put my mom on, and she'd have a cold, and I'd say, Mom, you sound terrible. She says, yeah, but I got to take my vitamin C. Because I'm going to kill this cold with this vitamin C. So I always thought vitamins were a joke. Yeah. So we changed the medicine from Rebif to Copaxone. I spent 6 months on Copaxone, and nothing happened. But every time I went to the doctor over those 6 months, Dr. Bowling said, get on that vitamin D. You've got to take large doses. My wife finally convinced me after 6 months of nothing happening with the medicine change, get on the vitamin D and see what happens. For 6 months, I'm taking 30,000, 40,000 IUs every day of vitamin D.
That's big, because most of the time it's like a 5,000 IU dose on the high side. So you're like,
he says, shove it in there. He believes, and it's in his book here, which I brought, he believes that there's something about vitamin D and the medicine reception in your body that for some reason, he thinks the vitamin D helps the medicine do what it's supposed to do. So for 6 months, I sat there and nothing really happened. The next 6 months, I'm shoving vitamin D, and all of a sudden, I realized there's not that chalkboard, that fingernails down the chalkboard thing going on. I didn't feel as tense. I felt more calm. I felt that things weren't going downhill anymore. So it took about 6 months after that for me to realize, I think I'm okay. I'm not getting any worse. I'm not getting any better. If this is where I'm going to be, gimme, I'll take it, because I can still survive. And so since, I guess it was 13 or 14, I haven't gotten any better, haven't gotten any worse. I'm still on my medicine regimen. He still insists on the Copaxone, still taking the vitamin D like crazy. Not 30,000 IUs, I'm down to 10 now. But I don't feel like I'm dying anymore. And for 8 years, I really was concerned that I was going to just, eventually, something was going to happen. Because when you have lesions on your brain, here's the explanation for MS. You get lesions on your brain and in your spine. Depending on where those lesions appear on your brain is the part of your body that's going to be affected. The lesions in my head have affected my legs from about 10 inches down from my waist all the way down to my toes. My legs are now in seizure, constant seizure. In fact, if I needed to, I could probably just pick this table up. In fact, now that I'm talking about it, I need to stop and pull my leg out because it's in seizure. But I'm okay. So the lesions happen, and that's where your body is affected. The neck is just, the lesions happen there. All I know is that they don't grow anymore, and I'm happy about that. And then there's also the nerve endings. We all have myelin around our nerves. MS patients, the myelin starts to deteriorate. So along with the lesions in your brain that are affecting the part of your body, the nerves start to eat away and things stop working.
Yeah, you don't get near as good a signal from the brain to that tissue because the transmission, the cable, if you will, has nicks.
Nicks, absolutely. And so that's where I am with my MS. And what that does to me now is it gives me this, I'm comfortable, I'm going to go on, I do the things as much as I possibly can. That I live on a ranch. I get out and I climb on my tractor. I pull myself up my tractor to groom the arena. Get on my zero-turn lawnmower to lawn, but I pull myself up on these things. And I'm sure that OSHA would prefer I don't. but I've got to keep going. So I feel like I've gotten a second chance in life. But there's something mental that happened to me during all of this.
I was just going to ask that. Like, was there a low point? Was there somewhere where you had to make a decision on how you were going to approach this thing mentally? Because it could easily wipe someone's morale, confidence. It could wipe it out. But you are so vibrant and full of life and passionate and energetic and all those things. I want to hear how you got that done.
Well, here's what happened. First of all, Kid Curry was a pretty famous radio DJ. Everybody wanted to be in the room with Kid Curry. Kid Curry was a pretty famous program director. When you're the program director of the number one station in Miami, you've got a rep all around the country. Everybody wants to be next to Kid Curry. But nobody wants to be next to the guy on a cane. Nobody wants to be next to the guy in the crutches, and nobody wants to be next to the guy in the wheelchair. And so I had a real mental thing that happened to me. I got depressed pretty severely. Only because I had this life of everybody wanted to be next to me, and then suddenly nobody cared. And I'm fighting this disease, and I'm getting help from my wife and my mom and the friends around me. But the people that I used to work with stopped calling me. I had 33 years of friendships. Nobody paid attention, except one little girl. She's not little, she's a woman, but there was one girl, and she called to find out how I was. So it really got me for a while. In fact, if it wasn't for a friend who pulled me out, because of my time in radio, and then I disappeared. I just left. When I left, I left. And for about 4 or 5 years, nobody even knew where I was. Well, one of the guys who had a major magazine in the business, the Street Information Network magazine, his name was Vince Pellegrino. He based out of New York. He finally found me because I have a 420 birthday, April 20th. His is April Fool's. So he missed calling me on my birthday. I missed calling him. So suddenly one day on my birthday, he appears. I'm like, Vincent, how you doing? And it just really recreated this relationship. About a year later, he decided this business that he had, this magazine, you know Billboard, but you don't know Street Information Network. because that's the secondary artists in America that he pushes to become number one. He found Katy Perry before Katy Perry was Katy Perry.
Wow.
So his whole thing is to find the underlying groups in the world, in America. So he had a very strong following. All the record companies really did everything they could to make him happy because he would bring them big artists. So Vince was fairly famous. He used to have every year he would have you see the Grammys, they get awards at the Grammys. Well, he would give awards to the record companies who promoted the best songs. So the street promoters, the guys who came to my office and put records in front of me. There were some of those guys who worked harder and were better. So every year he had an awards ceremony for these people. Well, one year he called and decided, listen, I want you to come out to my awards presentation in New York because it's time for you to get a Lifetime Achievement Award. Because I disappeared, I had great success in my career, and he thought I should come back. Well, it really mattered to me. Finally, somebody was going, hey, what are you doing, man? How are you? So I went out to New York, my wife and I, my kid. The award ceremonies at B.B. King's Blues Club. I roll in, and superstars in the back. I can't even talk about names, but big record company promotion people. They get my wheelchair, they throw me on stage, and I look out, and there's my 33-year radio career, and everybody's standing up, and I'm finally seeing my friends for the first time in 8-10 years.
Wow.
And it really mattered to me. The next morning, Vince said, listen, I got to go finish my awards. Tomorrow, let's go have breakfast, okay? Because he and I had a real good relationship. We wanted to get caught up. So he tells me the next morning that he's going to die.
Wow.
He had colon cancer.
Oh, God.
And was within the last 3 months of his thing. So to me, that was my friend Vince picking me up, shaking me off, and saying, you need to get back here. We need to see you again. And Vince said, you've got to do something. You've got to come up with something. And then when he told me he was going to pass away, I was, well, do you want me to come here and help you run your magazine? He said, my family wants to end the magazine here. But I want you to start doing something. I need you to try to come back. But then we had a conversation as the morning went on. Vincent, I can't get back in this business. Everything's changed. By then, there were real major corporate takeovers within an 8 to 10 year period. And no one's going to listen to a guy like me who says, this is the way it's going to be.
Because it's not the new way.
That's not the new way.
Right.
And so I told him I can't do it. But what what it made me want to do was to tell my story, to write about my radio career, to write about the diagnosis, to write about how bad it was for a while, and then to write about the magic of modern medicine, and then the realization that it costs to be disabled in America.
I want to talk about that. I want to switch that. That's really important. You have done such a great job filling our imaginations of that time in your life and that time in radio history. And then you did move on. And again, that just fills my heart of what you've done. And so then you become an author talking about some really important things. And I want to go into each of them as however you want to describe them, but we talked one about your story in radio. I'm always interested in authors because not everyone has a story, but not everyone can tell it in print because it takes a certain gift to do that and lots of editing and all this. But then you go on to write about political information, specifically in the Reagan administration when he decided to change something that allowed people who were saying one thing to not be challenged by the common man, if you will. So, and then you've put these into books. I want to hear those thoughts and those messages.
What really mattered to me at the end of my book, my memoir, Come Get Me Mother, I'm Through, was to give it to people if they didn't understand that anybody can get a chronic disease and it costs to be disabled in America. My father used to brag when he got his legs amputated. We have to buy a lot of stuff, but they're giving me tax breaks. Well, there came a time when all those tax breaks went away. So in order to drive my car, I had to spend $2,000 to get hand controls. I had to go to the hospital to be taught how to drive with the hand controls. Then I had to be tested by them. Then I had to be tested by the state to be able to drive with hand controls. So imagine this. I go to the hospital. I've done what I have to do. I've learned how to drive with hand controls, but I got to drive my car from Colorado Springs to Canyon City, and I've not been certified by the state. Well, I'll go ahead and make it. I got it. Then I set up an appointment in Canyon City to go to the DMV to be certified to drive this hand control. I get there. Does anybody know how to do that? you'll have to go to Pueblo to get certified. So, okay, I called Pueblo. I set up an appointment for the next day. I go to Pueblo, and I didn't tell them when I was setting the appointment up. I assumed that because she said, you got to go to Pueblo.
Go to Pueblo.
So I get up and I get out of my car, roll up my wheelchair, and I said, listen, I'm here to be tested for hand controls. Huh?
Look up the manual.
What do we do? and so the guy who was the only person who could, actually it was a woman, the only person who could certify me wasn't there. But I had to come back a week later. So I come back a week later. Here's the crazy part. I finally get in the car. The lady gets and sits in my car. Now, at this time, it had been years since I had run a Pueblo radio station. Remember, I told you my father had both legs amputated. So I had to move back to Pueblo, Colorado at one point in my career. And I was running a radio station called KDZA. And I was in Pueblo, and I was listening to the guy who I had hired to do the morning show. And when she gets in the car, she said, I went to go turn the radio down. She said, no, that's my favorite station. I said, oh, good. I said, so do you know Nick, the guy that was on the radio? She says, oh, yeah, he's my favorite. I love this guy. And so I said, well, okay, let's go ahead and take the test. She said, no, give me the paper. I'll sign it. So I went all the way through to get the certification, went to a one DMV, and they didn't have it. I had to come back to this one again, and then she didn't even make me drive. She just signed the thing for me. So anyway, that's just one crazy thing. But remember now, in order for me to get into my house, by the way, I had to pay for all that. There is no tax breaks for that. If I want to be able to drive around and see things and go to the store, I have to have this hand control. Nobody helps you with that. In my house now that I live in, I have a garage, and I've got there's an elevator that goes up one level to get me into the house. There are ramps that we had to put in the house. It's a 3-story house. I've got one of those chair masters. I get to 3 levels of my house. Probably $80,000 worth of equipment because there's another elevator in the back to get me to the backyard. I pay for that out of my pocket. I don't get any help with that. And if I didn't pay for it myself, I'd be a recluse. So it is not fair what your government has done to you. They've taken away these tax breaks for people like me, so it costs to be disabled in America. Pray you don't have to have this problem happen in your life.
Right, because your income potential has decreased unless you don't, so you have to figure out other ways, but in the meantime, you get no tax break and you have increased expenses.
If you want to survive, you have increased expenses.
Yeah.
So that was part of the ending of this book. That's what I really promote a lot. If you don't know what it's like to be disabled, please go find my book to learn what it's like to go through the process and see how aware you have to be so you can survive and know that it's going to cost you. So when Vince at this thing decided he wanted to get me going, I wanted to write the memoir to tell my story. I got done with the memoir and I was in the mood to keep writing. So remember, my father got me started in radio when I was 17 years old. My dad saw me go off to the big time. And when I would come off on vacation, I'd come home. He was always proud of me. Good job, son. I read about your ratings. The station's doing real well. My dad and I really had a great radio relationship. He was a Korean War veteran. Didn't have much of a relationship with him when I was young, but because we had the radio thing when I got older, we really bonded, and it was a good thing. So for me and my dad. But my dad, remember, Canyon City has one radio station. The guys on the radio were Bob Stevens. We had Bill Kafka. You had another guy in the afternoon, a guy at night, and those were the guys from right there in your hometown. And I would come home, and my dad would say, they fired Al Madrill or whoever, and they put on this talk show, and it's this guy, and all he's doing is lying. And it used to drive my father crazy because my dad was a newsman. Yes. He believes in truth.
Yes.
So I'd come home and he'd complain about Al Madrill. I'd come home the next year. You know what they did? They fired Bob Stevens. They got another one of these talk shows. Now they got 2 of these in a row, and all the guy does is lie and spew lies. So then it happened again. The entire radio station was wiped out except for the morning show, and everything else now is all syndicated in one direction. As opposed to having both sides of a political speech, you only have one side of political speech, and it's all misinformation, lies and fabrications. That's what was happening, and it used to drive my father crazy. So then I thought I would write a book about it and why it happened. Because something happened in 1987. I don't know. I mean, some people don't know this, and some people never even thought it was a possibility, but before 1987, you couldn't lie on American radio or television. Since the 1920s, when the FCC was first created, their whole point was equal time for contrasting points of view. We want to hear both sides, because you had Reverend Billy Joe Hargis, who was on there teaching and preaching, and the government and the FCC said, no, you need to go both sides of every issue. And it used to drive some of these people crazy, but it was the law. It was the way it was. It was that way from 1923, I think, until 1987. Now, President Reagan decided to veto the Fairness in Broadcasting Act of 1987. That act included the Fairness Doctrine, which was the rule that required equal time for contrasting points of view. So before 1987, if you as a citizen heard someone lying on the radio, you could go to that radio station and knock on the door and say, I want equal time so I can call that guy a liar and prove that this guy's lying. After 1987, you couldn't do that. No longer, because President Reagan said it was antagonistic to the rules given in the First Amendment. People should have the right to say whatever they want to say. Well, when you did that, Mr. Reagan, what you did was you took away my right to call a liar out as a liar. And I believe that the fabric of America has changed because of all of this. And it's gotten to the point to where you have a whole network now that basically spews misinformation. But it all started in 1987. It was legislation that was passed. Remember, he vetoed it. So it was passed by the House and the Senate, and he vetoed it. Now, you got to go back to the days and see who he was talking to.
I was going to say, what was the impetus behind that? That
the
makes
broadcast,
no sense.
Well, first of all, like I said, he said it's because it's antagonistic to the First Amendment. But before that, he was being approached by the corporate people in broadcasting. And remember, corporates, one thing is bottom line. So when you have to put all this free time on for contrasting points of view, you're killing me. You're taking money away from me. So if you read the transcripts and go back far enough in the research, you'll see that Reagan was being approached by the corporations of broadcasting, radio and television. We got to get rid of this thing because it's costing us money. So he said, well, we'll get rid of it and we'll just say it was antagonistic to the First Amendment. And you got to also remember at the time, Rupert Murdoch was supposed to wait a year to become a U.S. citizen. Ronald Reagan eliminated that and said, let's let him in now. You also have to remember that at the time, I'm not so sure that President Reagan was thinking clearly. Because remember, at the time in the 80s, Nancy was finishing his sentences. So it could very well be to me that this whole conglomeration was almost posed by someone. And they decided that this is what we're going to do, and we're going to figure out how to get this guy convinced that we got to get rid of this rule. Because I don't believe that Ronald Reagan would like America today. I don't think he would, because if you look back at his old speeches, he wanted free speech, yes, but he also believed in a free press, and he even states many times over and over in his speeches how he wants America to progress. He wants people to think well of each other. He doesn't want antagonistic people around him, and for some reason, this bill, which was passed by the House and Senate, was vetoed. And it's put us where we are today.
And you write about that.
Yes. Yeah, that's the death of fairness. This actually tells the story of what happened to a small American town and its only radio station after Ronald Reagan vetoed the 1987 Fairness in Broadcasting Act. It's the story of my father. It's my dad getting mad every time I come home from vacation. And, gee, they fired down the drill. They got this talk show on there, and all they're doing is lying. And he liked the owners of the radio station when he was working with them, for them, but when they became one direction on the negative, on the conservative side, it really bothered him. So that's what made me write this book.
And then there's a follow-up.
Well, the reason there's a follow-up is because I sent this book off to Hollywood. And I sent it off to a company that evaluates it for movie purposes. And they wrote back to me, they said, this is a great story, but you need to develop these characters a lot more. You got to develop the story a little bit harder, because as you can see, it's a real thin book. So I wanted to rewrite the story, but I wanted to rewrite it to appeal to young women. I have a thing in my, first of all, I got 3 girls and a boy. I was raised in a house with me and my dad and 3 girls. I believe in women. I believe that women can change a lot of things in the world. And I wanted this story to be directed at a young girl who grows up realizing the mistake that Ronald Reagan made, and that she eventually ends up running for president because she wants to bring back the Fairness Doctrine. Because remember, it's only legislation. And the Fairness Doctrine comes up in Washington as recently as 2 years ago. But there's one political party that doesn't want the Fairness Doctrine because they benefited so strongly from all the lying and misinformation. And so I wrote this story. At the very end of the book, this girl is a senator. She actually makes it to be a senator. She rallies America around her version of the Fairness Doctrine. It's very simple. You just make the entities, the people that own the facility, responsible for the Fairness Doctrine. In other words, when someone lies, it's their fault. It's the entity's fault, and the entity has to give the equal time. They have to find it, block it out, and give it for free. Well, her whole idea is to let the entities be responsible, and then when she brings up this new Fairness Doctrine to the Senate, it doesn't pass. It ties, and then the opposing party is the final vote, and the vice president votes in favor of the conservatives, and then she's like, well, okay, I'm going to go run to be president because I want the world to know about what we need to change here. So that's how it ends.
That's great.
Also sparked the next book. So
you got one in the oven?
In my head. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Actually, it's kind of in print already. I've started working on it.
Oh, nice.
But this is the transition from a guy who was a pretty exciting radio fun guy, and I really loved my career. I loved doing all the things I did, the raising money that we did, the stars that I met, the markets I got. I loved living in Baltimore, loved living in Washington, D.C. I'd never been to Smithsonian. I thought it was one building. So when you live in D.C., you go there all the time. Baltimore, the Inner Harbor, San Antonio, the great culture in San Antonio, and Miami. So I really loved the cities that I got to live in. So when this disease took over and stopped everything, it kind of messed me up in the brain. But then my friend Vince stopped and said, wait a minute, you're okay. You got to come back and do something. And that sparked me to write. And now that's what I do. I write. So.
And you write very, very well, my friend. Wow. I appreciate your time. I got a couple more questions
yes,
for you.
Sir. Yes,
Here's the first one.
All right.
Is there any philosophy, piece of advice, or pillar that you've picked up along the way, or that someone gave to you that has helped you get to where you are today? Not only, traverse through the myriad of obstacles to get to the top of radio, but then a far more difficult journey to get to where now you're not only thriving with MS at a pretty advanced level, but also emotionally thriving. Is there a piece of advice that you would teach me, share with me, and that our audience could grab onto?
I went through a lot after being diagnosed. I questioned everything: religion, my friendships, people I loved. What I came out to after finally making that turn back to where my wife and I could think, maybe we're not going to be doomed here. My wife is in fact, we're going to get into that story in a second because you need to hear that too. But my wife is very much a believer in gratitude. So we live a life of gratitude. And we're grateful for the things that happen to us. We're grateful for the things that we have. We give people. I'm a constant MS donator. I give $20 tips when I get my Starbucks coffee and freak kids out. We are very much in the feeling of gratitude. You need to be grateful for what's happened, regardless of what's going on in your life. You can change your mind into be positive, or you can be negative. Well, I believe a life of gratitude brings positivity. And we live in positivity in my house. And I'm going to quickly switch over to my wife, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all.
MS was the best thing that ever happened to us. We took my money when we moved to Canyon and decided to do some fixing and flipping. Went out, bought a couple of houses, remodeled them, sold them, enjoyed it. But my wife had to deal with the real estate people. She didn't like them. They didn't treat her nice. So she said, I'm going to go get my license, and I'm going to do this now. So she went out and got her license. 3 years later, was setting records in the state of Colorado per capita on house sales in Canyon City, Colorado. In 1 year, if you know kind of what Canyon is, 127 houses in 1 year.
That's insane.
Pretty remarkable for a person.
Insane.
But she was setting records in the state per capita for real estate sales. Eventually, corporate office heard about this. They start wanting to know more about this girl. They decide they're going to start putting together a consulting team to consult other people around the business to try to do the same things that she's doing. They're getting everything. She gets to become a member of this consulting team. And that was about 5 or 6 years ago. Now she is an international real estate consultant, plays the position of CEO in 2 or 3 different companies now. My wife is killing it.
Nice.
And this was my date at the Grammys every year. And I knew she was, because when I found her, she'd already worked in family law. She was already working for a financial firm. So I knew she had brains, but she was always the one that had to run the Kid Curry show. She was setting up my schedules, getting me packed to go to LA, getting ready, because tomorrow morning he's got to get up early because he's got this meeting over at the Universal Studios. And so she was really the person that kept me going. But when I stopped and I handed everything over to her, I can't imagine ever living the life that we live now through me. This is all her now. And
Wow.
I'm really proud of my exceedingly talented wife. And she is the one who makes sure that I have everything I need to survive. That's why I've got the hand controls. That's why I've got the stair lift. She's the one who pays. She does all this. This is her thing, is taking care of me and consulting her real estate clients around the country. She is on a Zoom call from 7 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon every day. Every half hour, a different client somewhere else in the world. And she does that 4 days a week. And so this has been a real change in our family. And so the MS thing ended up being a pretty good thing for us. You know, I'm okay, I'm not dying. My wife is now killing it in the real estate business and doesn't even sell houses anymore. So we're doing pretty good. And so this is a real positive life of gratitude. When you're good and you're positive, I used to always tell my kids, you know, when you bounce a ball, it always comes back. If you bounce it down and you think negative, it's always going to come back negative. But if you bounce it down and think positive, it's going to come back positive every time. And so my kids are even in this frame of mind. So we're pretty lucky. We live a life of gratitude. I've gone from the top to the bottom, and I feel like I'm at the top again. So it's been a pretty good run, and I'm now getting ready for my 4th book.
Oh, I cannot wait for that to get finished. And I got to tell you, so here's the last question.
Yes,
I'm gonna send one more just layer into what you just said.
Okay.
I have the opportunity to do a wedding here very, very short future. And when you mention gratitude, it's one of the things that I've chosen to talk about with this couple as they're going through that process. And you are exhibiting what I call mature gratitude, meaning, and I'll be sharing this message, is gratitude in its basic form is, to me, a sense of spirituality. When you are truly grateful, there's a raising of energy, a vibration that is akin to me and attuned in with spirit. But true maturity in gratitude is when you can be grateful and find the gifts in the tough things, in the challenges. When you can do that, that means it's not just about the good times thing and then you forget about all those great principles. It means you can put them into action when the going gets tough. And to see you do that, you've done that in spades. And so you're a living example of gratitude. And I want to thank you for that.
Doctor, it's my pleasure, and I want to thank you for your time today. And I can tell you that I'm honored to be here, because as a guy who sits here in northern Colorado and sees all these commercials on television, as soon as I saw Dr. Ramos with a medical degree and a lawyer, he caught my attention. That tells me more about that man than even meeting him. If you can do those 2 things, so if I ever have a car wreck, I'm calling Dr.
Oh, well, we don't want that to ever happen.
No.
So here's my last question.
Yes.
How can people get a hold of you to learn more about your story, to get your books, to read, to support you in your life and in your vision?
It's pretty simple. I've got a website, krcurry.com, has everything on there, including my books. There are podcasts that I have been on that I've uploaded onto there. There are some other thoughts and blogs that are up there, but it's all at krcurry.com. You can also follow me on Facebook at krcurry the author. It's the same thing on Instagram, krcurry the author. And you can learn about all these crazy things I've done, but I also want to tell you that if you have got multiple sclerosis, there's a real good book you need to read, Optimal Health with Multiple Sclerosis by Dr. Alan Bowling over at Swedish Hospital here in Denver. This guy has given his whole life to researching multiple sclerosis. He doesn't do anything but MS, and he's the guy who said, if you take this drug and take all this vitamin D, I think we can make a change. And he did, and it happened. So I'm a big proponent of the magic of modern medicine, and my doctor, Dr. Alan Bowling.
Kid Curry, I'm a big fan of you. So thank you for spending the time with me today. I wish you nothing but the best. You have such a friend in me and in Ramos Law.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best in all your adventures moving forward.
I appreciate you having me, and I would love to do anything you guys need. I'll help you, whatever you need me. Put me out there. Let's do something.
Let's do something. Okay. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, Doctor.
Have a great
Appreciate
rest of your day.
Yes, sir.